What is going on, everybody? Taylor here, and today I am here to talk about F1, the movie, the new Formula One movie that just came out. I was lucky enough to go to an early screening, and I'm just gonna preface this video before we get into anything by saying I am a big Formula One fan. I watch Formula One all the time. I stay up stupidly late or get up absurdly early a lot of the time to watch qualifying and to watch races, and have done that for quite a while now. I even broke out my George Russell Williams racing hat for this. Don't know where I have other Formula One stuff lying around. Don't know where any of it is, so we're going to be repping George Russell today while we talk about F1. I did not know what to expect going into this movie because a lot of the time these kinds of movies are not made for the fans of the particular sport because it's a movie. So there's going to be creative liberties and there are going to be things that aren't completely accurate, and it's just not going to be a one-to-one translation of the sport, which I knew going in. However, I really, really don't think this movie is going to be for Formula One fans, especially people who are tuning in every week of the season. I think it's going to be more frustrating than entertaining for a lot of you. At least it was for me. So let's just jump into this. I do want to say I tried very hard going into this to separate the part of my brain that knows about Formula One and enjoys Formula One as an actual sport. I tried to separate that out as I watched the movie and just watch the movie on its own as its own thing without letting any of that kind of interfere with my opinions, but I just don't think that's possible, unfortunately. What I will say is I don't usually like judging movies based on what I think they should have been rather than what they actually are, what was presented to us. But this one's tough because this clearly should have just been, and probably started out as, a Days of Thunder sequel. So much of this movie feels like they're trying to turn it into like a NASCAR movie, except it's with F1 cars, which really does not work. Ignoring all of the rules they very clearly throw out the window, and like the technical stuff that they really, really try to put in a lot of that doesn't make a whole lot of sense most of the time. I still feel like somehow I know less about Formula One after seeing the movie than I did going in. I kind of just felt like my brain turned into mush a little bit. It also just doesn't explore anything fully in terms of the technical stuff or their story or character elements. So a lot of the technical stuff just ends up weighing it down because it doesn't really feel like it goes anywhere with the story, which I guess isn't totally fair and accurate because the technical stuff does tie into Carrie Condon's character and her arc. So the technical part does play a part in the story, but not to the extent of time that they spend on it, and not all of the elements that they include are that important to it, and specifically to her storyline. So it feels like if they would have streamlined that stuff a bit more to where it's just dealing with the stuff that her character is particularly dealing with, and then going a little bit deeper into that, rather than kind of feeling like it's trying to throw a little bit of every possible rule and technical element from the sport into it. If a lot of it feels like an info dump, and I think it would have felt a lot cleaner and a lot less confusing and a lot less weighed down by some of the technical stuff if it would have just put more focus onto specifically the stuff that you need to know for her character and for her story arc and for the eventual outcome, I suppose, the eventual kind of dramatic issue that happens towards the end of the film that does have to do with the technical side of racing, but it's not something that you would need a lot of knowledge about to understand why it became an issue and why it's a problem that the characters are facing and why it would be so tough for Carrie's character specifically to have to face that issue. It's something that could have been done with a lot less time and exposition and just kind of added stuff in there that I feel like sometimes they maybe thought they had to throw in there to kind of appease the actual F1 fans a little bit, or maybe to make the movie feel smarter or just more immersed in the world of like F1 maybe. I'm not sure, but I feel like it's definitely something that could have been cut down quite a bit to either help bring down the super long runtime. It's not super long, it's like 2.5 hours, but it feels a bit like a super long runtime. Or they could have used the little moments they'd cut out of that to kind of give us more time with some of the characters I wish we would have got to spend more time with, which I will touch on in a little bit here. One of the biggest crimes I think this movie commits is being boring. I was pretty bored through a good bit of the movie, and maybe that's because I'm used to watching actual Formula One races, and the stakes here just never really felt that high, and the drama all felt so manufactured, but not even in a fun way, like when Drive to Survive tries to do it, and it's like at least kind of messy and interesting. The racing scenes were shot technically well, which I would expect nothing less of from the guy and the team who gave us Top Gun Maverick, which is one of the most technically impressive films we've probably ever gotten. So that's not surprising. That is something that was great. But it just wasn't enough to get me excited and invested when I didn't particularly care about the story that they chose to tell here. They went with a fictional story rather than going with or even taking inspiration from so many of the real life stories that have come from Formula One. There's just so much you could do with picking that, with basing something on a real driver's experience. And the fact that they decided to go with someone who hasn't been in the sport in 30 years could pop them back into an open Formula One seat that so many people would kill to have and would be fighting over, and sponsors and the board and like so many people would have so much to say about that. And they do touch on it in the movie, but it still just absolutely feels so absurd in a way that's really, really hard to lock into, especially because if they're going to do a story like that, you can't have like 60-year-old Brad Pitt in there. I'm sorry, but you just can't. If you're gonna do the guy who comes back to the sport after a long time out, it's got to be someone who's been away for like 10 years and they've got to be like 40. Like that's because that still is the story you want to tell essentially, but it's giving it a bit more realism to like the age group, the end of like the age group of people who are in Formula One and could be somewhat believable and would be an interesting story. So I really didn't love that. And it's really obvious that they cut a lot of story from this, particularly concerning Pierce's storyline, the younger driver. Joseph Kosinski has confirmed that there was a lot of story cut, which also ended up meaning that Simone Ashley's character was completely cut from the film. She basically has a flash on the screen, blink and you'll miss it cameo, instead of actually having like lines and a character and a story arc that she at one point had, which as someone who loves season 2, specifically season 2 of Bridgerton very much, and was so excited when she got announced as having a role in such a big blockbuster movie like this, it's really, really tough to not feel a little bit bitter about it when her story with Pierce having the younger driver, the focus on the younger driver, trying to make a name for himself and the woman he connects with, instead of shoving Brad Pitt and his storyline that you really don't actually care about. At least I didn't ever actually care about. And his weird love story situationship thing in there. I love Carrie Condon, but I just did not buy into it. It wasn't fun or sexy or romantic really in any way, which is a crime. It's a crime to do that to Carrie Condon. But yeah, this movie clearly wants us to care about and root for Brad Pitt's character Hayes, when I really just wanted to know more about Pierce and spend more time with him and learn about his journey of how he fought for his seat in Formula One, because the character very briefly talks about that, but we don't really get any of his backstory. And we get to see kind of flashes of his struggle throughout the movie, but the focus is very much more on Hayes. I don't know. It's tough because I feel like the story here was kind of fighting itself. They were trying to have their cake and eat it too. They were trying to have a Pierce storyline and a Hayes storyline, and you kind of got half of both almost. There was definitely more in it for Hayes, but it still just kind of felt like narratively the movie was fighting with itself a little bit, which not in a good way, because a Formula One rivalry movie, that would kind of make sense almost, but it doesn't work here. If they were going to cut storylines, which clearly they did, we should have just cut the weird, sabotage from the inside thing with the guy from the board. There was enough at stake already for the team needing to be successful, and with the drivers' rivalry situation within the team, it didn't need to happen, and it took up screen time when we could have been spending more screen time with Pierce or actually getting to see Simone Ashley's character. So that was kind of disappointing. It felt like the movie was, again, fighting with itself. So it was trying to do too much, and then because it was trying to do a little bit of everything, it didn't really give you enough of one or two things that could have made it a strong story. There's also something I wanted to touch on here because I think it's kind of relevant to the casting and the story of this movie. There's been a lot of conversation around Hollywood not having real movie stars anymore, and Tom Cruise is kind of like the last movie star we have, which the president of movies, yes, he is a movie star, and he's a real movie star and a big movie star. And outside of him and Leonardo DiCaprio and a couple other, people from that generation, movie stars just haven't been as much of a thing in the same way. And that's because instead of making movies like this about Pierce, about Damson Idris, I believe is how you say his name, about his character, and instead of keeping Simone Ashley's character in the film, we get to see Brad Pitt and Carrie Condon, which again, I love Carrie Condon, nothing against her, but we get to see that storyline, which is the less interesting storyline. It feels like a storyline we've seen a million times with, someone older and someone washed out trying to kind of reclaim their former glory, and, has made all these mistakes in life and is kind of trying to atone for that. And it just didn't feel like an interesting story, or, there wasn't enough really unique in there to justify it, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, I really just wish we would be focusing on striking a better balance, at least. I think Top Gun Maverick did a pretty good job of that. You had Tom Cruise get to be his movie star self in it, but you did also get to shine light on lesser known actors and actresses who have now gone on to have really thriving careers outside of that. You had Miles Teller, who was already kind of a movie star in his own right, so he didn't really need the boost. But you had Glenn Powell, who's now basically in every movie that Hollywood is producing at any given time. He's shooting 6 movies at once. You've got Monica Barbaro, who just got nominated for an Academy Award. You've got Lewis Pullman, who was just in Thunderbolts and who is about to be in the Spaceballs sequel. You've got Danny Ramirez, who also ended up in the MCU and who is going to be joining Lewis Pullman in the new Avengers movies. It doesn't feel like F1 is doing that kind of thing or chose to do that kind of thing when it could have done the same for Damson Idris and could have done the same for Simone Ashley and could have, felt like it cared more about that. And I know that that's like behind the scenes stuff and maybe I shouldn't care so much about that, but I kind of do. So that was like a little off-putting. Like I went into this already kind of being upset that Simone Ashley had been cut out of it because I was so excited when she was cast. And I think having a woman of color play a role like that in a big movie like this, in a sports movie, in a racing movie where women, recently have been making some really big strides, both behind the wheel and in engineering and in, just team roles in general. And there is quite a bit of that in this movie with Carrie Condon and with some of the engineers. But I don't know. I'm kind of forever going to be sad about that, I think. This movie is also a little weird with, like, it wants to do the wink, wink, nudge, nudge thing where it has the little Easter eggs that only Formula One fans are going to realize are happening. But it, does it in a way where it feels like story has been cut from the movie because, it doesn't even present them in a way that would, kind of make sense if you'd been paying attention to the movie. There's a cameo from Total Wolf at the end that he doesn't get shown, unless I'm crazy, he doesn't get shown, being in the Mercedes garage or talking to any of the other team principals or, that's the first time you see him on screen. And he has an interaction with Pierce. And unless you know who Total Wolf is, you're like, why is he offering to talk to him about something, about going to another team? What does that even mean? What is the significance of that? Whereas the rest of us know that if Mercedes is trying to poach a driver, that's some shit's about to go down. All right. I just thought it was kind of funny. And then randomly have Gunther Steiner cutaways, which might be my favorite part of the whole movie. So funny. So funny, but it has to be so jarringly random if you don't know who that is. Also, all the random Will Buxton screen time as the journalist took me out. It's just, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but there was some stuff that I just found so freaking funny that I have no idea how it translates if you don't know anything about F1. What I will say is, can you introduce me to Carlos Sainz might be one of the funniest lines of all time. And I really hope that the other drivers just gave him shit about it when they were all doing their screening together. I would have paid so much money to have them record a commentary or have been just being able to sit in the theater with them while they watch this, because there's no way that they weren't just sitting there with their head in their hands while they're watching this movie. Another thing I do want to say, and y'all can disagree with me if you want, but it's insane to me that in a big Hollywood production like this, the most attractive people on the screen at any given time were the actual real life Formula One drivers. Any of us who watch the sport know that they're attractive guys, but putting them in a big Hollywood movie next to a bunch of actors, and you're still wow, Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc and specifically, but oh wow, those guys are all hot. I wonder, they probably hired them to be drivers in the movie. This is probably they're up and coming actors. No, those are the guys who actually drive the cars and they're just beautiful. So, whatever. As he always does, Shea Whigham does so much with the very, very little screen time that he's given here. I so badly wanted his character to just kind of be fuck it, and just up and go and just follow Hayes over to Formula One, just so that we could get more of him on screen, because he's so great and I just love him, and keeping him around longer would have been super cool. Look, this movie is 30 minutes too long, at least, which is crazy considering that the storylines were cut and the story they do choose is simple, but it doesn't feel like anything really happens in it in the 2.5 hour runtime. Things happen, but you're kind of jumping from race to race without feeling like you're really getting a lot of character development. Instead, you're like spending time learning about technical stuff, kind of, and watching Hayes' character do things that the FIA would crash out over, and he would have been suspended probably. Them deciding to be super technical, but then just skipping over qualifying completely and just randomly having drivers on the grid and not really telling you why they're where they are, except for Hayes, who like keeps breaking the rules, so they keep putting him at the back of the grid, even though normally that would just mean he wouldn't be able to like do the race, or he would be starting from the pit lane or whatever. But it just, maybe this like movie makes a lot of sense to people who don't know about Formula One at all, and maybe they're just like, oh yeah, that's how Formula One works, totally makes sense. Like they just go from race to race and they're like losing races, and so yeah, dramatically for the narrative that makes sense. Maybe it's fine. Maybe watching this movie is so fine if you don't actually know what's going on. But for me, I just wasn't having fun with it. I was having a hard time grasping onto anything, even outside of the technical stuff that was driving me crazy. It was really hard to sit there and feel like we were getting any real character development or character growth in any kind of interesting or meaningful way. There are character arcs and there is character growth by the end, but not in a way that feels like it was earned at all or really explored at all beyond kind of surface level stuff. And I don't really feel like Pierce, he did learn from Hayes, but in really frustrating ways and not anything substantial that feels like it would actually make him a better driver at the end of the day. It just kind of feels like there was crashes and drama and them being assholes to each other and like not really getting along and a bunch of like race stuff that again like doesn't really make sense. And then there's your typical kind of like comeback story ending. And that scene, I will say, the last like 10, 15 minutes or so of like the actual racing, the final race we get, that was cool. I will give it credit. I was stressed the hell out in a good way. And that was probably one of like the only stretches of time throughout this movie that I was locked in and completely engaged with what was happening. But it still doesn't really feel earned by the end of it, which really sucks. One other thing I do want to say, there is a lot of little moments and like instances you can tell that are inspired by real things that have happened in Formula One, crashes specifically. And there is one that happened in this movie. I'm not really going to spoiler to give anything away, but there's one that happens in this movie that made me really, really emotional. Not because the movie earns it, not because the movie has gotten you to really care about or be invested in the character at that point, but because it like slammed me back into watching a real Formula One race, one specific Formula One race that I watched live as it happened, and watched a crash happen where I was convinced I had just watched a racer die. Like I was convinced on live television that I had just watched somebody crash and die. And so that was pretty triggering for me. And I got really emotional in like a really bad way for a bit. And that kind of sucked because it wouldn't bother me as much if I feel like the movie had put in the work to like earn that moment and earn the emotion it was getting out of me, instead of just kind of feeling like it was getting the emotion out of me because it knew it could do that, because it was like referencing a real crash or a couple real crashes. So that kind of sucked a little bit. That was kind of terrible. I am hoping that everyone will give this movie a chance. I'm hoping you guys will check it out and form your own opinions about it, especially if you are a Formula One fan or know anything about racing, because everyone else I've heard from and talked to that has seen this movie early, that has gotten the chance to, so many people have had so much fun with it and have really enjoyed it and had a great time and love all the racing sequences and just think that it's a fun summer movie. And I hope that that's the experience that most people have. I really do. I don't want people to walk out of this movie feeling the way that I do, but I'm never going to lie to you guys about how I feel, especially with a movie like this where I spend so much time, so many hours watching the actual sport and recognizing all of the actual drivers and team principals and, you know, whoever else, reporters and journalists and all the people who've popped up in the back of this movie who are in it at some point, who have lines or don't have lines or make a cameo. Like, you know, I know who those people are. I spend hours watching those people on my TV every year. So I don't know. I don't know, guys. I probably will give this movie another shot at some point. See if now that I know what to expect going into it, if that changes the way I feel about it, because I don't have expectations. I know what I'm going into, and maybe knowing what I'm in for, I'll be able to kind of turn my brain off in the way that I was hoping I would be able to this first time, where I won't be so focused on the stuff they are or aren't doing correctly, even when I wasn't trying to focus on those things anyway. But I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts when you all get to see the movie. Please leave a comment down below. Please subscribe to the channel if you want to see more from me. I am trying to get to 20K subscribers. You guys have already almost gotten me to 15, which is so, so exciting. If you want to find me on social media, all my links are down in the description. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and I will see you next time.